Hey guys, how's it going? Dr. LaHue here. Welcome. Glad you're visiting my channel. And today we're going to talk about the high side and the low side of type 1, or what you might say the paths of integration, what they look like under stress, what they look like when they're relaxed, what they look like when they're healthy, what they look like when they're unhealthy. There's a lot of ways to talk about this, but I think the high side, low side, or is a good way of thinking about it. All of us go from time to time between our high side and our low side. I like to think of it kind of like this, that each one of us lives in a cabin, and we live on the cabin, and that's our Enneagram type, or our number. So for example, today we're talking about type 1. They live in the 1 cabin. And next to them on either side are their neighbors. On one side there's the 9, and on the other side there's the 2. And the 1 can borrow from their neighbors. They can borrow the laid back characteristics of the 9. They can relax when and not take everything so seriously, not take themselves so seriously when they need to. They can lean on that neighbor whenever they need to borrow from that neighbor. But that's not where they live. They live in the 1 cabin. They can lean over to the neighbor, the number 2, and they can pick up some of those characteristics when they need to. Being helpful, using their goodness and their attention to detail to benefit other people's lives, to be helpful to other people, and to step up to the plate and give their resource away and their strength away to others. And you'll find that each of us, we tend to lean more on one neighbor than the other, or depend more on one neighbor than the other, but we can all learn to, become comfortable depending on both neighbors. And then when, things get really bad and they get under stress, they go down to the bottom of the hill where the outhouse is, and they go to, for the 1, they go to the 4. And they pick up, kind of the worst characteristics or the negative characteristics of the 4. And they just need to observe themselves that that's where they're at. They don't need to stay there in that outhouse. And then they can go back up to their cabin, back up to their normal place of life. When they're doing great, and they're feeling like everything's going great, they can go up to the top of the hill where the orchard is. And in this case, for the 1, that would be the 7. And they can pick from the fruit, of the 7 and some of the best characteristics of the 7. But they don't live there. And they'll go back to the 1. And that's their normal place of operation. But today we want to talk about those paths of integration down to the outhouse and up to the apple orchard. Okay? So let's talk about the 1. The 1, of course, is the type that is dedicated to doing the right thing, being a good person, being understood and perceived to be a good person, attention to details, sometimes called the perfectionist or the reformer. This person is an anger type, and they are, an obvious anger type in that they get frustrated. I'd say frustrated is probably more what you'd see than outright anger. If you want to look for anger, you're going to see it in the 1, but you tend to associate, that evidence more with an 8, because they tend to react and respond more, where the 1 tries to keep a lid on it, tries to, bottle it up so that they don't look like a bad person or an angry person. So that anger kind of seethes beneath the surface, more like resentment or frustration. 1s, can get easily frustrated with other people because other people don't take their responsibilities seriously. And 1s do. They live with an inner critic that is constantly berating them to get up earlier, stay later, try harder, accept responsibility, step up to the plate, whatever you want to call it. 1s feel a deep sense of responsibility to, do the right thing, take care of others, put their stuff away when they're done, and they really want to broadcast that or enforce that. They'd love to see that enforced on everybody. So that anger type, what it looks like is, people are stupid. That's what it means to be an anger type, is you kind of live with that with that underlying idea is that people do the wrong thing. So 8s want to push them back and work around them and let them know how stupid they are. 9s just kind of accept it and decide that it's best to just try to get along with people even if they infringe on you and do stupid things. 1s really want to organize people, manage them, broadcast rules and guidelines and laws so that people are then inhibited and can't do stupid things. So let's talk about what it looks like to go to the low side of 1 when 1s are not doing well, when they're under stress, when they're frustrated, when they've hit their limit. Okay, what does it look like? Well, they become less able to manage that their reactions. They're more likely to demonstrate that anger when they're under stress, because it's harder to keep a lid on it when they're frustrated. They've been pushed now into a corner, or their back's against the wall, or they just feel like they can't keep it together anymore, and so you'll see that anger, that frustration, the lid will come off. And I like to think of 1s as being like the volcano, where 9s are kind of the dormant volcano, and 8s are kind of like those geysers, that just kind of, let off steam constantly. 1s try to keep a lid on it, but when they do explode, it can be very critical, very harsh, very judgmental, and 1s can sometimes be unaware at what their anger is doing to people around them, or how intense their anger is coming across, or the impact of their anger. This can also look just like rigidity and inflexibility. They can kind of pick up that stubbornness of the 9. They can be stubborn, rigid, inflexible. You got to understand that from a 1's perspective, they're right. Okay? It's not like, where some of us might go off, get information, and believe because we've gotten good information that this is the right opinion. 1s are a body type, right? So a body type means it's an intuition. They just know in their gut that they're right. Now, how do you convince them they're wrong? You can't. You could bring a lot of information, a lot of facts, and you could persuade them, but they're going to go with their gut. And their gut, if they believe their gut is telling them, and they believe their gut is a good source of information for them. And so if they believe in their gut, in other words, they just know that this is right, and they just know that this is wrong. If they just know that something's wrong, you can talk as long as you want to talk, but you're not going to convince them through your arguments until they internalize it, and then in their gut believe that your arguments have won. So I guess what I'm saying is when 1s know they're right, they're going to be really frustrated and upset when you're trying to get them to go against what they know to be right. In fact, they probably won't go against it. They probably would rather just walk out than to go against what they believe is right. They'd just say, I'm done. That's probably the response you're going to get, is when you keep pushing your agenda on a 1 and you're trying to push them to go against what they believe in their gut to be right, they're more likely to probably just step aside and say, if that's the way you want it, then just count me out. I can't go along with that. So they become rigid and inflexible when they're upset. And under pressure, they may worry that, how can I trust other people to do the job right? And so they may be very skeptical that other people are going to, really put the time, attention, and intensity into getting things right that they would. So they may come across, as doubtful as to whether other people are going to be able to maintain the quality that they would. May be hard for them because they're going to micromanage. That's going to make them micromanagers. 1s are great managers if they can resist the temptation to micromanage, because they want to get in there and they want to make sure things are done correctly. And this is kind of the problem is, people can't read your mind, and so I guess one of the questions you want to ask one to think about is, how do you know that your way is the right way? And again, you just know, I get that, but there are other ways to get, what do they say? There's lots of ways to skin a cat. There's other ways to get results and to get a project done. And sometimes when the one gets really frustrated, they really can't see any other way but their way. And they can become very rigid about that. And that can be difficult to work with. I mean, obviously, it can be difficult to work with because, the rest of us never measure up. And it's not a good feeling to feel like I don't measure up to, and I'm disappointing you all the time. And ones can make you feel like you're disappointing them all the time because you're not doing things quote unquote right, which is a nice way of saying their way. And if you can just own that as a one, that what you really mean is my way, then maybe you can relax a little bit and realize that other people have their way of doing things too. The difference is most of the other Enneagram types are a little more open to other people's ideas, and it might help you to be a little bit more open to other people's ways of doing things, and to just take that at least into consideration and be a little more compassionate when dealing with other people. It can be hard for ones to then delegate responsibilities. And when you don't delegate responsibilities, then you're just taking responsibility. So you then accept too much responsibility, and that is going to increase your stress, which is going to increase your anger and frustration. So you've got to learn to let people do things in their own way, at least a little bit, their own personality, their own style, and so that you can then trust people to delegate responsibilities, because if you don't, you're going to get overwhelmed. And when you get overwhelmed, it's not pretty. It's not pretty for you, and it's not pretty for the people that have to work and live with you. It can be hard for you to believe that people are capable of meeting your high standards. And the reality is maybe they don't need to meet your high standards. Maybe they just need to, ones, just try to capture this thought. Know when good enough is good enough. That's really hard, I know. Know when good enough is good enough. It's never going to get 100%. It's never going to get perfect. It's never going to get exactly the way it ought to be. So maybe it doesn't have to. Maybe you can say that project is 80% what I would do, 80%. But see, if somebody else does it for you and you can trust them to do it, that frees you up to focus on other things. And so if you've got too many irons in the fire and you got too much going on, then you're likely to not get it done perfectly either, because you got too many other things to do. So good enough, in the education world, they'll say 80% is mastery. In other words, if you can master a subject to 80%, then you've mastered the subject. And I think it would be good for ones to sort of relax and say, everything doesn't have to be perfect. Everything doesn't have to be quote unquote my way. That, good enough sometimes is good enough. And I just have to sign off on it and let it go, because I can't give my time and attention 100% to everything. You just can't. You can't give 100% of yourself to work and also 100% of yourself to your family. You can't. You got to do some give and take. And so you have to set some priorities and say, look, I'm going to focus the bulk of my attention on this, and I just recognize that means the garage isn't going to get clean this weekend, and that's okay. Not everything's going to get labeled like I'd like it to be, because I need to focus attention on my kids, or I need to focus attention on my marriage, or I need to focus attention on my spiritual life, or I need to focus attention, on my physical health. And so sometimes you're going to have to just let some things go. And that doesn't mean you need to hide them, because that might be your impulse is, well, I can't let anybody know that all of my life is not organized, perfect, and cleaned up and put away and restored. No, be okay with good enough is good enough. And, there are other things in my life that are priorities, and I can't manage to make everything the way, perfect the way it ought to be, because you're going to resent people, and people will end up resenting you as well. When fours are under a great deal of stress, or when ones are under a great deal of stress, they kind of move to the low side of what it means to be a type 4. Fours are special people, and fours, their sin is envy. Okay, fours, and we'll talk about fours more in the you can go back and you can watch my videos on fours, but essentially the four is envious that everybody else seems to fit in, know who they are, know their identity, and fours kind of feel like they're left out, and they feel like they aren't connected to the group, and they don't fit in. Okay, and all those things. When a one is under a great deal of stress, they can kind of look out at everybody else and say, look, everybody else, they get to go home early. Not me. I got to stay and I got to get all these papers done. Look, everybody else, they can relax and go to the birthday party and have a great time. Not me. I got to stay and I got to get all this, these numbers sorted out. And so they can kind of be envious that everybody else is having a good time. Everybody else can relax, and everybody else can take it easy, and everybody else can take, their full vacation. Everybody, they can get sort of that resentful, bitter attitude that everybody else has it easy, but not me, because I wear this label manager or supervisor or whatever it is you've gotten yourself into. I wear this label and I've got to do twice as much as everybody else, and I can't go home at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock like everybody else does, because somebody's got to make sure, somebody's got to stay, that's it right there. They go to that low side of 4, and they can become unusually harsh. Their self-confidence will drop when they're under stress. They may want to escape life. Fours have a very romantic view as to what life ought to be like. They're going to get swept off their feet, and they're going to end up in some mysterious, novel with some kind of exciting romantic, And ones, when they're under stress, they probably sit and look at their screensavers of beach resorts and think, man, why can't I just get away from this, this cold office? Why can't I just get away from all this responsibility and all this headache and go sit on some beach somewhere and just sit in the sun and relax? And, and ones can kind of go to that dark, and their darkness, I should say, want to just go off and live some fantasy, because this life stinks. This life is terrible. This life is overwhelming, and I'm depressed, and it's dark, and it's gray skies, and a never-ending pile of work that needs to be done. And if I could just escape, and I could just go sit on some beach in some resort somewhere, then I could relax. And so they kind of have that escapism mindset, that the 4 sort of lives in. Dissatisfied with life, dissatisfied with the mundane. 4s are very dissatisfied with the mundane nature of life, and ones can become very dissatisfied with all the mundane tasks and details and responsibilities that they have. They feel like they're enduring and persevering, but they're not really living. They can become oversensitive. Hey, there's something from the 4. 4s can be very sensitive. What did you mean by that? What are you implying? What are you saying? And when ones are stressed, and they're doing their best, and they're staying up late trying to get everything, finished, and they turn it in, and somebody looks at their work and maybe has a little bit of a questionable comment, the one might respond with, what did you mean by that? What are you implying? Are you saying my work isn't living up to standards? Yeah, I think about those apple trees in The Wizard of Oz. Are you implying that our apples aren't what they ought to be? There's the one right there. Are you implying that my work isn't up to par? Relax. We're not your enemies. Relax. Get your anger. You're letting us see it. That's not good. You want to be good. It's not good to get that overwhelmed and that frustrated and that bitter and that angry. Ones can become depressed. Think about the 4 who's, I don't fit in, and so they decide to, wear all black, and they walk around. Melancholy is a key word for 4s. Melancholy, and they're okay with sadness and despair. And look at that one, everybody else goes to the picnic, but they got to stay on Saturday and get all the work done. And I just wish I could just throw all this and go to the beach somewhere, but I can't. And so now they're frustrated, worried, depressed, and shameful, ashamed. They're feeling shamed. Shamed I didn't get this work done. Shame for feeling this way. And 4 is a shame type. And so when 1s are unhealthy, they kind of move to, or under stress, they kind of move to the low side of 4, kind of all the bad parts of what it means to be a 4. Type 1s acting out of that lower side can become self-righteous. They can become frustrated when others don't conform to their righteous standards. And righteous, we mean by righteous the way things ought to be, the way things should be. And 1s are very keen on oughts and shoulds and prescribing that and forecasting that. This is the way all people ought to live. I think a lot of 1s are probably in law enforcement, because people need to be maintained. People need to be controlled. People need to follow the rules, and we'll all be safe, and we'll have a better environment. We'll have good neighborhoods. Okay? People should be punished for their bad behavior. It's not, I think, like an 8 could get like antagonistic about people need to be punished for what they've done. I think a 1 is more like matter of fact, like this is what you did and this is the consequences. That's the way it is. And I think a 1's a little less personal about it. It's more of a transaction. You violated the law, and so here's your ticket. Report to the courthouse. It's just a transaction. You did this, so you reap what you sow. Okay. They can focus a great deal of attention on what others ought to be doing, how others ought to be behaving. They can blame others excessively for what they think is wrong or imperfect. Well, there you go. That's not very encouraging, is it? If you live with a 1, you've probably seen all of this and maybe worse. You've seen and heard, this frustration. And you try and be sympathetic to it. And that's good. That's all you can do is try and be sympathetic. And 1s, you need to observe this within you and learn to become sympathetic with yourself. Just recognize it and say, oh, here I am again. A 1 doing 1 things. And have some compassion for yourself. And say, well, here I go again. A 1 acting like a 1. And then learn to relax and laugh at yourself and just feel the peace come back. Okay? When you stop taking yourself so seriously, you've got to stop taking yourself and everything so seriously. Good enough is good enough. And I can't get it all done right, so I'll do my best. I'll do my best. I won't get 100% every time, but I'll do my best. And that's really healing for a 1. Now, when a 1 is doing well, when they're healthy, and they're not under so much stress, and they can relax a little bit, they move to the high side of 7. In other words, when they get out of the outhouse of 4, for them, the 4 is an outhouse, they're sitting there mad and frustrated. Everything stinks down in the outhouse. I don't have any friends or neighbors down here. Nobody wants to be with me down here in the outhouse. Just recognize I'm sitting in an outhouse. This isn't my home. I don't have to stay here if I don't want. I can stay here as long as I want. If I want to be mad and angry and frustrated and hurt and shameful and depressed, you can sit in that outhouse as long as you want to. Nobody is going to want to visit you because you're in an outhouse. So when you recognize that you're sitting there, just decide, do I want to stay in this outhouse any longer? If I don't, then maybe I want to go back up to my cabin. And then when things are really good and you relax, you can go on all the way up to the top of the hill, to the orchard, and pick some of the fruit from the 7. Yay! Well, let's talk about what that looks like when a 1 is really healthy and can relax. On the high side, type 1s become more self-aware, more supportive of others, more inspiring, more funny, relaxed, compassionate, and even heroic. Ones strive to be virtuous and to be good people. They want to do a good job and they want to look good. But not in the same sense like a 3. They want to look like they're good people. They don't necessarily do things to be seen by others, but they want to have integrity. There you go. They want to be seen as people of integrity. But they don't necessarily need everybody's applause. Just a simple pat on the back saying, hey, you did a great job. That's probably enough to propel a 1 to keep going. They don't need, your giant words of accolades or admiration. Just a recognition that they did a good job. Emotionally intelligent 1s temper their seriousness about quality and standards with a balance toward levity and humor. Okay, so they're not, in other words, they lighten up. And they start to laugh at themselves, at their work, at others, and they bring a little more levity into the situation. They dedicate themselves to and their strong commitment and hard work and success to the organization, and not just what a great job I did, but they tend to think more in terms of the whole group and of the team, and they can moderate their need to be right and listen to more ideas and to listen to other people's perspective. They can, when they get in touch with their anger, they cannot be so angry. Now that sounds strange, doesn't it? But when you get in touch with your anger and you recognize, man, I'm angry right now, then you can kind of let off some of that anger and not be so angry with yourself and so judgmental and harsh with yourself and with others, and learn to channel it more constructively into more productivity. They can laugh at themselves and soothe their inner critic and have compassion on themselves and others. When they're healthy, their inner critic gets a little bit less, a little quieter, and they kind of hush that inner critic. They open up, like a 7, they open up to more variety and more possibilities and more alternate ways of doing things. One of the things that's true about 7s is they look for variety. They want to sample everything. They want to try everything in life. 1s don't. 1s like what they like, and that's it. But when 1s are healthy and relaxed, they can take on a little bit of that sampling attitude, saying, well, maybe my way is not the best way. Maybe there's something better than, maybe there's another way, an alternate way. I should listen to other people's opinions. I should hear what else is out there, what else I might be missing. I might grow by finding out how others think this ought to be done. So they open up to a wider variety of possibilities, and their black and white rigidity, right and wrong, black and white, becomes more like a 7, more grayscale. I hate to say it, but 7s live with because I am a 7, 7s live with the mentality that whatever helps you sleep at night, who am I to say? You do you, right? And 1s don't. They don't live that way. They don't think that way. They think in right is right and wrong is wrong. Okay, I can appreciate that. But when 1s are healthy and less under stress, they kind of adopt a little bit more of that 7-ish way of thinking, of saying other people have a right to do things their way. Other people, it's not my business. It's to each his own. Live and let live. Whatever. However you want to say it, is the black and white rigidity becomes a little bit more grayscale. They become more optimistic. 7s live in optimism. 7s, it's always half full, right? 7s will reframe everything into a positive way of looking at life. They want to stay away from sadness. And 7s have their own weaknesses, which we'll talk about in the 7 video. But for 1s, instead of getting frustrated and angry and upset and I can't trust people and this isn't going to work out right and they're not going to do it right, everything's going to be wrong, it's all going to fail if I don't give 110%, they can relax a little bit and they become a little more optimistic. And they start reframing things into a more positive way of looking at it. They become more optimistic. They become more spontaneous. 7s are spontaneous. Let's do this. Let's do that. Let's do this. Let's do that. Let's go now. Right now. Right now. And 1s can become a little more spontaneous when they are not under the gun, when they're not so under pressure. They can become more spontaneous, more optimistic, more fun-loving, more easygoing, and a pleasure to be around without the negatives of the 7. They can become more upbeat, more humorous, not take themselves so seriously, willing to let themselves look foolish like a 7 and be a little bit of a clown and bring a little bit of the beach to the office, bring a little bit of the vacation to the family and to the office. So I've enjoyed this video. I hope you have too. I hope it's encouraging to you. If you're a 7, observe yourself, let yourself relax, realize you're never going to get it 100% perfect. Do your best. Leave the results. It's not going to be the end of the world if everything isn't put away perfectly, done perfectly. No matter how perfect it is, one day you're going to lay this life down and it's going to be over. So you can't fix everything. You can't, stop every bad thing from happening. And think about the life you want to live and, the people that you want to share it with. And, they don't always need a dad looking over their shoulders, ready to scold them for any little infraction that they might occur. They also want a friend and a playmate and somebody to laugh with. And all that is in you. It is. It's in you. You know it's there. You just got to let it come forth. Let it shine forth. All right, 1, it's a great personality. We're glad you're on the team, and be present to life. Don't be so frustrated over everything that isn't done exactly right, quote unquote, your way, that you can't be present and accept things the way they are and even enjoy things that may be done differently than the way you would do it. All right, I'll see you guys next time. Blessings.